Just last year, I played a wonderful game called Agalos from Wonder Boy Bobby, and I instantly had a new favorite game. So when I found out Wonder Boy Bobby had another game that I could buy a physical copy of right now, I didn't hesitate to grab it. So let's talk about Tanuki Justice. Now, Tanuki Justice is a love letter to those classic side-scrolling action titles that filled arcades and that eventually made it to home consoles like the Sega Master System. You've got ninja action, adorable animal protagonists, and that classic gameplay that is easy to pick up, but difficult to truly master. Described as a run and gun, and it certainly fits in with that genre, I'd probably just call it an action platformer or something like that. It's a bit of that gray area, and it doesn't matter anyway. Your goal as one of the Tanuki twins, yes, this can be two players, is to go from one side of the screen to the other while jumping and flipping around all obstacles in your way and smashing that button to throw shurikens to defeat a constant onslaught of ninja enemies. Unlike a more straightforward run and gun, or at least what I think of when you use that term, you don't have an arsenal of weapon choices and the ability to cover a screen with tons of bullets by just holding down a single button. Your shurikens move slower and have a very limited reach until you grab the power-up that makes them bigger, faster, and maybe go a smidge further. You also have a gauge in the top left. You fill it by attacking enemies and collecting things, and when that fills up, you can release a giant attack that fills a lot of the screen and moves slowly across it. You can also break these chests placed across each level for gems that give you points and fill that meter. But the chests can also hide a shield, that shuriken power-up I mentioned before, and even an extra life if you're lucky. But that covers your selection of attacks and powers. You can fire in all directions while moving and use the D-pad or the joystick to do so. I certainly can't imagine using the joystick over the D-pad, but at least the option is there. But it isn't a twin-stick style shooter. You move and aim with the same directional input. You can stop in place using the shoulder buttons and aim a little more precisely when needed, or be a little more flashy and do jumps and throw straight down and all that fun stuff. Movement is also similarly simple, with plenty of room to master your strategy so you can move through levels quickly. You always run rather than needing to activate it with a button or the dreaded double tap, and you have a double jump to start. The part to master is really that double jump, which has a bit of forgiveness to it and essentially gives you an invisible in-air platform to pop off of. The only thing I really feel like is majorly missing is the ability to drop down off a platform, which seem needed in a few spots, but the idea is obviously to jump in time with your double jumps. You can also use that speed and your jumps to just dodge all the enemies. You don't need to fight all of the time. Well, except maybe when you get into these one-screen gauntlet sections, but even then, most are dodgeable. But the game's main focus is not on just being beaten, but playing skillfully and racking up a high score. That is the main draw of Tanuki Justice, is to get that high score. So you really want to attack all the enemies on screen, grab all the items, and do so quickly as you get bonuses at the end of every level. Getting a really good run and beating your high score unlocks more modes and little achievements. Of course, you have higher difficulties as well, so you can't keep besting your best until your thumbs are tiny little stumps. Tanuki Justice is built on that classic arcade foundation where even if you manage to beat it, you still want to best your high score. Thankfully, there are modern improvements to this classic style of gameplay. First off, you can continue indefinitely. You only have 3 lives to start, or really 3 hits, but you don't have limited continues. Also, when you quit out of a game or decide not to continue after a game over, you can come back later and start from that level you last unlocked. This is a really handy feature, allowing you to practice levels rather than starting back at level 1 and hope you can get far enough to play a game of trial and error. It is probably the biggest improvement it brings compared to the 8-bit titles it's paying homage to. Plus, for those who enjoy not being tortured, there are difficulty levels, and while the base is labeled as normal, it starts out relatively calm, and the difficulty curve isn't actually just a sharp incline. But for those that do enjoy a challenge, you have plenty of options to make Tanuki Justice a lot tougher. Yes, that does mean the game is not very long. There are only a handful of levels, and each one is only a few minutes long. But it is unlikely you're going to sit down on your first playthrough and ace it. So coupled with that and the other challenges isn't exactly a single sitting either. Of course, what is any game like this without the enemies and obstacles you'll be facing, and even more so, the bosses? But the cast of enemies and bosses is great, with both a standard set that you can learn how to best take on and unique ones for each level. Usually, you'll just be fighting a few varieties of ninjas. One may throw out a spread of shurikens, and another may just run at you with a sword, but you'll have an onslaught of fish to deal with in a level with rivers and waterfalls, or a bunch of undead to fight in the graveyard level, so things stay fresh with each new level. You also have trickier platforming to contend with, but it isn't overused as to slow down the game any. But you'll find the platforms that appear and disappear on a time rotation, others that move up and down or across the screen, and just other things like that. I think the spooky level is the one that uses these kinds of things the most. Every level has some sort of mini-boss and a boss at the end, but I will say in the last levels, the what could be a mini-boss seems a little less separated from the normal fray. But the main bosses are really fun. They cover a lot of screen space and have a range of attacks that you can learn and manage. Well, I find them fun, but I will say they are very hectic on occasions, so you may find them more frustrating. I think what really helps with the bosses is despite their large health pool, they don't take an insane amount of hits to take down, so they don't become tedious or frustrating. I can't really always say the same with the larger enemies, as sometimes their health pool feels a bit too much when trying to stay on top of the other enemies constantly showing up. I'm sure you've probably noticed by now that Wonder Boy Bobby has the wonderful ability for really recreating the graphical style of the Sega Master System while also doing so in an almost no limitations situation. So if you're a fan of the SMS, you likely will really enjoy the design of Tanuki Justice. But even if you have no strong feelings about the style of the Sega Master System, the pixel art and the overall visual presentation is still really great. The level of detail on everything from the main protagonist to the regular enemies and the bosses are exactly where they need to be. The game really shines with the bosses though. Large, sometimes nearly screen-covering sprites with lots of detail and a hell of a lot of personality. Level design is great too, with each level being distinct from the other and with their complexity and difficulty scaling as the game goes on. The first level is rather flat, for example, but there are a lot more moving platforms and verticality with each level. They also have plenty of bells and whistles like really smooth parallax scrolling and some other effects, once again feeling like the best case scenario for a Sega Master System game. Still fitting the aesthetics, but also giving you a little extra eye candy. Colors are on point as well, once again riding that line between SMS aesthetics and modern sensibilities. While I appreciate older games trying their best to stay vibrant, sometimes those older palette choices can be really harsh, especially when not on a CRT. But Tanuki's Revenge gives me the right amount of warm fuzzies while not making my old man eyes bleed. Of course, I have to touch on the soundtrack, and I really love it. It fits the game perfectly and really captures that late 80s vibe. It wouldn't feel out of place in any action game from that era. It also again fits in with the Sega Master System design of the game and sounds like that classic SMS FM synthesis. It just has a good amount of energy the whole time to keep you on your toes while still maintaining a catchy groove and melody. I really enjoy Tanuki Justice. It isn't anything groundbreaking, but it didn't need to be. It falls right into a place for me to be something I'm happy to have supported and especially glad to have a physical copy of. It's a charming indie title that obviously has some passion behind it and a wonderful homage to one of my favorite retro gaming systems. Tanuki Justice may not be the next big thing. It is a short arcade style experience with a niche game style right now, but I think it does what it set out to do very well. It's one of those games that if you feel like it's something you'll enjoy, you very likely will. But if after watching the trailer and reading a review or watching this video, you still aren't convinced, you probably won't be once playing. I don't mean that as a bad thing. It just does exactly what it set out to do. It doesn't have any big surprises, so your gut instinct is probably right. But it is something that could easily be a hidden gem in 15 years. It's easily overlooked. I do think that if you're a fan of any or all of what Wonder Boy Bobby is doing with Tanuki Justice, you owe it to yourself to grab a download or a physical copy. It is out on several platforms digitally, but a physical version exists for the Switch. If you prefer physical, I wouldn't sleep on it for too long. Links to where you can buy a copy will be in the description. But that's all from me for this episode of RetroActive. Let me know if you played Tanuki Justice or if you think you will in the future. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and I'll see you next time. Hey, this is Kevin, once again thanking you so much for watching another episode of RetroActive. If you liked it, please hit that like button, subscribe, leave a comment, all the stuff I'm supposed to say, and I also want to remind you that I do have a Ko-fi account and a Discord. Links will be in the description. Bye!